Good morning, everyone. I'll let you take a second or so to settle down into your chairs. We're so glad to see you all here this morning. It's a fantastic turnout. We've got an exciting morning and half of an afternoon planned. But before we start, I've got a few housekeeping notices to give you. So we're not expecting a fire alarm. They've done all the testing. But if it does sound, please take direction from a member of the Jesus College team. Stay within the college perimeter and head to one of the green areas, which is just the other side of this wall. Or if we're in the other rooms, you'll see the double doors. Just make your way out onto the green areas and then get further instructions from the Jesus College team once you're out there. Toilets, if you haven't found them already, are located just outside in the reception area, and there are 2 other sets of toilets near the refreshment rooms where you've probably just been. And if you need assistance throughout the event at all, we do have a quiet area if anybody needs to go out or if you're not feeling well. Just catch one of my team. We've all got red lanyards on, and we will assist with that. And before I launch into my spiel, just a little bit about the wonderful Blendology badges. You may have noticed that the badges already contain the agenda, information about the event, the speakers and the panellists, and details about all of the exhibitors that have joined us today. You can exchange contacts with everyone you know just by tapping each other's badges. Why not give it a try now with your neighbour? And it'll light up and buzz once you've made the connection. It sounds like it works. You can spot the venues that are exhibiting. They're all wearing yellow lanyards. So if you want to talk to a venue, just look out for a yellow lanyard. A big request from me, though, please, please, please do not take these wonderful badges home with you. We do have to pay for all the badges, and as you can imagine, the technology is not cheap. So make sure you hand it back to the reception staff before you leave. And I'm very pleased to say that both of our speakers have very generously offered to share their slides, and we're also recording the session. So please do sit back, don't worry about taking loads of notes, we'll share everything with you afterwards. And now we get to start. So I'm Judith Sloan, I'm head of Meet Cambridge. I've been at Meet Cambridge for almost 19 years. The company was founded in 1998 by a very forward-thinking group of colleges who recognised the need to have a central enquiry point for anyone that wanted to bring an event to Cambridge. And I'm pleased to say that we're still going strong. We're still entirely funded by the Cambridge colleges, and we're handling around 3,500 enquiries a year. We've got 53 fantastic member venues, which from 2016 also includes hotels, other venues such as Newmarket Racecourses, and the museum at Duxford, so a huge choice. We are now recognised as the official conference bureau for the city, and we offer a range of other services because of that. So we're often helping ambassadors for conference events to help them bid for their events to come to Cambridge. So we've got a comprehensive programme of support through the Cambridge Conference Ambassador Programme. And very recently, we also joined up with professional conference organisers, opening doors and venues to offer a range of conference organisation services. And I'm pleased to say that Madalena is joining the panel today. We've absolutely been bowled over by the support for this event today, and it's saying to us loud and clear that you all want to support sustainable events and make a difference, and that's music to our ears. We're pleased that we can all come together today to discuss, to learn and collaborate. And it's our hope that by doing this, we'll find a workable solution to some of the challenges that we face when we're planning events. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Stuart Webstale, fellow and domestic bursar here at Jesus College. He's going to help me lead the proceedings today. Stuart was brought up and went to school in Australia. He studied sport management as an undergraduate at the University of Deakin, completing his Bachelor of Commerce in 1993. He moved to the UK in 2002 and joined the award-winning Moller Institute as General Manager. He held that role for 14 years, during which he saw 2 substantial building projects and considerable business growth. Stuart was appointed to Jesus College Domestic Bursar in November 2018, and since joining, he's played a key role in large-scale kitchen developments and has been instrumental in developing and delivering the college's sustainability strategy. Stuart also currently sits with the university's Bursar's Sustainability Subcommittee and the university's Transport Working Group. He is a trustee of CFCI, the Cambridge Forum for the Construction Industry, and previously he was Director of Venues of Excellence from 2010 to 2017. Stuart lives with his family in a Cambridgeshire village. Over to you, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith, and good morning and welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here, and hopefully you'll have a terrific day and leave with some inspiration, and obviously extend your network as well. So my role initially is to introduce some of the speakers, and we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. When we do the Q&A, there'll be microphones passed around. If you can, please wait for the microphone, because that will assist our recordings as well. So the first speaker this morning is Marina. A quick run through her bio. Marina brings over 19 years of experience and expertise in sustainability, decarbonisation, supply chain and change management for public and private sector organisations across Europe, Africa and Asia, spanning multiple sectors. Marina is the founder of impact consultancy Bemari and a co-founder of travel and tourism sustainability consultancy Terra, verde. In her spare time, Marina has also served as a committee member of the UK Business and Biodiversity Forum, a lecturer at the Chartered Institute of Marketeers, and is a mentor in a range of sustainability accelerators. Marina has worked in and across over 20 countries, supporting organisations to transition to more sustainable and restorative and distributive practices, and is passionate about empowering individual and organisational action. If I can encourage you all to give a warm welcome to Marina. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Now I'm going to have to follow that up with actual presentation, which hopefully will deliver some inspiration to you. So thank you very much for that. Clicker. Right, technology will be my friend today, I promise. I think what I want to talk to you about today was sustainable events, but the people angle of that. But probably not in a way that you're immediately imagining, because when we think of sustainability, we immediately think of environment, the physical objects, the items, various impacts. And there's also the social side of things, which Anji will talk to you about in a bit more detail. But where I wanted to come in is kind of in the middle of that, because when we talk about sustainability or making change, we really talk about change management and change in people's behaviors. And that's ultimately what it's all about. It's not really about sort of, the various materials that are getting involved in the process. It's who are the people who are interacting with them, who makes decisions, who actually then creates the experience at the events using those resources, and therefore how do we actually engage with those people. So what I wanted to cover today is essentially how do we actually work with the behavioral psychology or the preferences, so generally how we make decisions to make sure that all sustainability event kind of considerations can come into play. So to start that, which I'm sure I will work, yep. Let's start with what do we actually mean by a sustainable event? And there's a number of different considerations come into play, and we probably sometimes don't really look at all of them, and there's kind of some sort of buzzwords that we probably can be starting with. But this is our framework as to how we think about sustainability at events, and there's a number of components here. So the green ones obviously will be the ones to do with environmental impact, and this will be the decisions around reducing the impact, reducing the consumption of resources, and just making sure the choices we're making are in fact contributing to a reduction and a better impact. There's also the inclusion aspect to it, the event for all, and so there's kind of multiple considerations that come into that. But there's also 3 aspects on the right I want to draw your attention to. There's a big element around the governance and how the events are actually managed, what kind of partners do we bring along, and what sort of conversations and how those decisions take place along the life cycle of planning, delivery, and afterwards. Because that's where a lot of touch points with various people become an opportunity not to just learn, but also start sharing some of the lessons learned and the benefits and expand and amplify those messages. And that planning aspect is actually very often the key to delivering a really impactful events from a sustainability perspective, because lots of times what we hear from event managers is actually, we don't have time to make a different decisions. We don't have time to find somebody else. This is how we did it last time, it works. I just need to deliver it in whatever the timeline is. So that aspect actually is becoming really, really important, because a lot of the choices we're making have to fall on the right timelines. We need to give ourselves time. And these are going to be new decisions, new choices. So they're not going to happen on their own, and they're not going to be perfectly kind of listed out for the options to choose from. So that governance and planning is a massive part of this. Positive legacy is kind of what comes with pretty much any event. That's the purpose of why we bring in the events forward. So it may be the positive legacy in terms of the inspiration, or maybe the messages that you have left, and we think of it as sort of brain print, which I'll talk about in a second. But that's going to be massive impact. So what is the opportunity there to start putting those messages into that legacy? What is the opportunity to then create normal event management and normal process around how events are delivered, so the new normal becomes more sustainable and becomes more environmentally positive? And kind of linking into that legacy is encouraging ecological change. So through the choices we're making, you will have an effect on the actual event that you're delivering, but ultimately you have had touch points with multiple suppliers, customers, partners, sponsors, etc. They've all had a message. So now they will also probably have, hopefully, taken something away, and that change now starts proliferating. It becomes a new normal. It becomes kind of a much broader impact, and amplification is really, really important. So it's also really critical to think, even if I have done everything I could have done in terms of environmental considerations at a particular event, what is the message I want the people who've attended or touched in any way, I want them to go away with? And what is the message I want to align myself with as well? So how does that need to imprint on anybody who's touched around us? So I wanted to just share this with you in terms of thinking, like, where does this power then come in, and which elements do we consider? Because you will have some sort of way of affecting all of these components at any event, no matter the budget, no matter the timeline, no matter the content. So in terms of then the focus for this conversation today, I wanted to share 2 tools for you to then have the positive impact. First is thinking about where you have control and where you have influence. And second, how do we then actually take the control and influence as levers, and how do we influence human behaviors to then start implementing any of the changes? We'll start with the impact and control and influence. And I wanted to share a framework with you that we use around thinking about impact. So there are 3 different types of impact. One is the impact that is footprint, and that's the footprint that we leave behind. Tends to be negative, tends to be what the conversation tends to always be focused around, and this is probably waste, that could be carbon footprint, that could be lots of other different things we think about. And this is a natural consequences of a lot of our actions, right? So we can't really pretend that there'll be 0 footprint from any human activity. That's just the current nature of it. What we need to try to do is to reduce it to as close as 0. And this is where all of these different targets we hear about, net zero, decarbonizations, really talk about how do we get it as low as possible. But at the same time, you also have handprint. And handprint is where you're trying to intentionally create positive change. Hopefully positive, I'm going to say, because impact can be positive and negative, and intentions can also vary. But in this context, we are focusing on intentional positive change. And this can be intentionally making certain choices, intentionally maybe paying for something that's more expensive because it's the right thing, because it will shift the market. It can be intentionally supporting any of the charities, NGOs, projects, it can be lots of different things. But what are we doing intentionally? And the important thing here is we always say to differentiate between intentionally reducing your footprint and intentionally adding something or creating sort of an additional benefit somewhere else. So if you're reducing our waste, that's not really handprint. That is reduction of footprint. But if you're creating a new opportunity for a new supplier, or if you're creating any kind of additional ecological zone or wildflower meadows somewhere, that's an intentional handprint. So it's also really important to make sure we're not really conflating the two, because there's a place for both. And the final one is what I just mentioned earlier, brain print. So what are those messages people are taking away? And they might not always be intentional. This could be simple things. I guess not in this particular venue or this event, but often you'll come somewhere and there will be single-use cups. We've done our best. The cups may have been made of whatever the material. We may have reduced and managed the waste. What are the attendees now seeing as a norm? Well, that's a norm, so that's okay. And the event was sustainable. They've told me that it was. So therefore, that's the association I have now formed, right? So if various suppliers are not really able to offer you the kind of support that you need on the credentials, and not asking them, suppliers also go, nobody's ever asked me, so why would I bother quantifying my carbon footprint or making any effort, spending money? Nobody really cares. So we've just created this impression that it doesn't really matter to anybody, or it only matters if you pay for it. So there's a number of things that you probably will be taking away from various experiences, or customers or attendees or participants would be, that you might not necessarily see. A really good example of this, in the movies, they used to have people who smoked. It was really, really cool. So if you see somebody smoking, that's a really cool character. And now that's not actually allowed in movies because of the brain print and associations that used to create. So we can also start thinking about what kind of brain print do the events actually attend, and therefore where do you also have more power. And just an overlay in terms of where you have those opportunities. The green tends to, for the most part, be footprint, but also handprint, because you can actually sort of do something positive, and there are various initiative opportunities you will have. And governance, partnership, positive legacy is definitely your handprint, because it requires intentionality, requires a bit of thinking about kind of involvement in that front. But brainprint could actually be either around all of these aspects together, because it's a combination of what leaves an impression. But encouraging ecological change is actually a combination, cumulative message and cumulative experiences that people have at that event is what leaves them with either wanting to take action and maybe knowing how to do it, where to start, being inspired, or feeling like they haven't yet because everybody else is already doing this. And that's a really, really important factor in terms of the experience you can create. So how do we think about what we can actually do? There's lots of different things can be done. Handprints, footprints, but lots of also different pressures you probably experience as event organizers. And the starting point is always to start thinking, where do you actually have appropriate levers? Where do you have the most control and the most influence? And start where you are. So you start with what's available to you. It could be commercial relationships, it could be design decisions, it could be choices you're making, or it could be influences. They could be nudges, they could be questions, they could be recommendations and encouragement, and it may be over time, but that change starts also going across your value chain. It could be your partners, who maybe your sponsors in some cases. What kind of messaging are you sending to them? And maybe are you prompting them? Please don't bring way too many items of merchandise to this event, because maybe we don't really need all of those things, but obviously you need to get your name out. Let's figure out a better way to make sure that your brand is promoted and in fact is associated with something that is not as wasteful, because why would you want to see your brand name in the bin, which can often happen. So, what kind of conversations can we start having that wouldn't necessarily infringe on the commercial benefits, on the functional, benefits? There's lots of different objectives that you're obviously going to have to deal with and contend with. But the combination of those conversations, control, influences is ultimately what shifts the industry, right? So the science tells us that to create the movement, you need 25% of believers and followers, and that's what creates the tipping point. So if you then transfer that onto industry, when does it become normal, and when does the market respond in terms of affordability and availability of technology and various solutions? When the suppliers just come to you and go, everything you wanted, and also the best credentials ever, when it becomes a norm. So how do you create that norm is this combination of control and influence. So to talk about how things become a norm and when normality plays in, kind of moving into the conversation around what shifts people. So people ultimately are at the center of this, but if we then design for people, if we design sustainability initiatives, or environmental considerations around people, and just consider what would stop people from taking on better solutions, what would stop people from creating waste or using single use, or any other choices people are making. Nobody intentionally wants to harm anyone or anything, right? So nobody intentionally wants to be unsustainable or wants to create any kind of damage. So what would be the things that either would stop people from doing that? What would be the motivations that would drive them in the different directions? And what might be the levers that can help us align and actually come somewhere in between to start directing and shifting within the resources that may be available to all of the parties. So I'd like to introduce the ladder of interventions to you. And that's basically one way of looking at what kind of interventions can we actually then utilize to help people get on their journey and start making decisions across the entire value chain. And this ladder was originally developed many, many years ago from the medical profession. And it was actually looking at public health and how to start encouraging people to start making decisions that are inherently better for them from health perspective, might not be quite aligning with what people might want to be doing or thinking is the right thing for them. And it's kind of very similar to sustainability, isn't it? Because we all kind of know it's a good thing to do, and it's kind of the health of all of us, but it's not quite as easy as wanting to do the right thing and wanting to do the ecologically beneficial item. Plus, we have various barriers of costs, time, availability, lots of different things. So what the ladder is looking at, if you go up the ladder, that's obviously the effectiveness of the intervention. So if you do not have choices that are in any way ecologically damaging, that's the ultimate solution, right? Because then there are no options to choose from and there are no behaviors to in any way kind of have to contend with. You just do the right thing. So we've always actually concluded that benevolent dictatorship is kind of the only way out of this because then you don't have any bad options. Practically doesn't quite work. So then you have an alternative kind of the bottom moving arrow is the fact that the intrusiveness, the level of intrusiveness of these interventions would obviously be maxed out at the level of taking the choice away, and people don't really like that for some weird reason. But if you take choices away from people, they do feel like they've actually been deprived. So knowing that you could have done, but now you can't and not at your will, is problematic. And if you go down, obviously in terms of the libertarian approach, or in less of intrusiveness, is just giving them whatever choices exist and just seeing which one they go for. We kind of know it doesn't work either for other reasons, but choices and information and awareness isn't really the thing that gets people to go in a direction of planetary boundary aligned behaviors, right? So the steps in between is essentially what we need to think about: what are the combinations and what are the most appropriate actions and kind of progression, depending on which audience and what circumstances you're working in, to work with. So we'll just work through this ladder and basically see how we find the right balance in different aspects of your events. So starting from the bottom, obviously we have the monitoring choice means you've just given them various options and just see which one they go for. And sometimes it might just mean that you've said, here is a sustainable option for event organizing, and there's different kind of resources you're going to have, and here is the regular option. And one way of hearing that is, here is the sustainable one, and here is the unsustainable one. Yeah, so this is the one which will like help all of us, and this is the one which kind of will kill the humanity. Which one do you want? So that's that nice option to kind of have as well, but that's not really the framing we tend to have. So clarifying choice does help. When I say sustainable option, I mean X, and the regular one will probably not have something included within that. So people now have a bit more information, and because you've also given them an option, you've kind of created that. It can also look a little bit different. It can also be things like that, where you've actually created different choices for people. All of those choices are very practical, and you're not actually nudging them towards anywhere, but you at least saying, don't put it anywhere outside of those things. So you've taken the option away of completely messy option, but it's still fairly free. But what you've also done here, just to kind of point out, is there's gamification. And gamification is super powerful. So our brain is just wired to win, win, score, collect points, which is why it's so popular in terms of Pokemons and various kind of leaderboards and things like that. So all you want people to do is put things in the right bin. How hard can it be? Apparently very. So what can we do? We can gamify, we can clarify, we can use visuals, we can use prompts, which is what those kind of symbols tend to do. And that's seen and been kind of shown to be very, very effective. And one of the other examples is, things like green selection on the merch. Sometimes you will have in the different brochures, here is the things that we would normally offer you, and here is the better things. And so that's kind of one way of looking at just seeing which way people would go. It doesn't really move us very far, but that is a starting point. Another way, example of gamifying and actually drawing people to something that you want them to do. Does anybody know what this represents? Have you seen this? You're nodding. Anybody else nodding? A couple of people are nodding, so you're familiar. So that's a ladder, which is a musical ladder, musical steps. And basically what they're trying to do in a public subway is to try to get people to walk on the left side or the right side, it depends which direction you're kind of going, of the stairs, right? So we all have seen the steps on the tube or in the sort of public transport, on the stations, on the train stations. Please walk here. Similar idea, but what they've done is gamified it. They've given an incentive to behave in line with what you're asking them to do, because it's fun. And people want to do fun stuff, not just score points, but they also want to enjoy it. So there's a YouTube video on this, which is what the screenshot is, so if you wanted to watch it, please do. But basically people just would walk down and music would happen as it would on piano, because it's just the musical keys. So now it's fun, we're all on the right side of it, nobody's upset because you have told them to do something they didn't want to do, and nobody's now rebelling because I will not walk on the side you want me to walk, and therefore it's a really interesting example of how behavioral nudges work. So we're again tapping into the way people want to engage with stuff, we're making it fun, we're not giving them lots of stats and explain why it's not a good idea to walk towards oncoming traffic. It's getting you where you need to be in a very light-hearted way. So some of the kind of ideas in terms of gamification, making it fun, not throwing sort of rationale at people, and just nudging them in a way that they would normally flow. So moving up the ladder, all of those can also work, but then we basically, another way is to shift the default choice. And this is talking to our inability or lack of desire to make an extra effort. So if you're having to do a little bit more, even if it means clicking an extra button or checking in on any other sort of tick boxes, we don't really want to do that. So one example that's probably quite popular around this is the organ donor register. So in the countries where you have to opt out, the uptake is 3 times the uptake in the countries where you have to opt in. Because then you have to intentionally say, I'm going to do something, and therefore people don't really kind of go and do that, but if you already put them on there, it's going to happen. So at the event stage, what does it look like? Well, menus is always a really good example, because people always say, but we have to have meat, bless you, we have to have meat, and we couldn't possibly take it away because people will rebel. But if you actually think about the menus at a lot of events, part of the challenge why people rebel is because the vegetarian option, I'm a vegetarian, so I can speak from my experience, vegetarian option tends to be 2 things, somewhere at the bottom of the menu. It's the kind of thing you will never choose on your own, and you probably don't even like, because not vegetarian doesn't mean you eat everything, and it's much less appealing, whereas the standard sort of meaty options would be very elaborate, and lots of different kind of things that will actually draw you to them. So if you address that part, that's kind of part of the challenge, thinking what's the friction and what is the human preference. It's not actually the meat itself or lack thereof, but you could just have core menu that is then of the highest standard or the same as you normally would offer. It's there, but it's delicious. It's attractive. It's as good a quality as it would have been otherwise, but you're still telling people, but if you want meat, you absolutely can have it. Just let me know. And so that level of friction again, kind of takes away the sort of default position, I always eat meat at events, so today I'm going to eat meat, whereas, oh, do I want it? Maybe I don't. And so that, again, starts reducing not just the consumption, but also kind of the level of unhappiness that people might experience at that sort of friction. But what it also does, it reduces waste, because you're basically asking people to pre-order something actually much more expensive very often anyway, and might not actually be consumed and eaten. So there's a commercial benefit to that, there's a planning benefit to that, and it's a little bit easier to ease somebody in because you didn't tell them you've taken it away, you've offered them a really cool menu. So now I'm giving you stuff, and that psychologically works very differently and very important. So giving something rather than taking it away is the message you want people to take. Moving up, how do we now incentivize choice? Let's say we have all different options and we kind of just want to nudge people towards that. And there's a few different ways that you can do that. So How do we incentivize? Again, positive reinforcement, right? So some examples here. If you arrive by bus, I'll give you a discount. We all like a discount, but again, it gives people something, and you're just asking them to choose options that already exist, and it's not the level of effort, and they could still drive if that's what was most convenient to them, and you're not penalizing them either, but it's the positive reinforcement. And the Oaxaca example is you're giving them a bit more transparency. So you give a bit more information. So there is the carbon, probably a bit small, but you can see, first of all, there's a carbon impact. So you kind of go in, if you cared, you would look into this. Not everybody would, but you're almost creating this kind of thing where, well, it's on the menu, therefore it's normal to look at these things, therefore everybody looks at it. So I also probably should be considering this, otherwise I might feel bad that I didn't. But you're also using the price, which is one of the most important aspects, to nudge people. Meat is more expensive. And IKEA is an example of this. They've actually made their meatballs that are non-meat balls cheaper, and that also has seen a significant level of uptake. And again, you haven't told them how they're going to save the planet, or humanity, or anybody else for that matter. You've just done exactly what people would normally do. What options, what's the sort of, description, and how much am I paying for this? What's the better option sort of on that balance for me? So again, it's sort of reducing the friction and just go in with basically what people value, as opposed to appealing to a kind of niche level of interest, which often if you see the promotion at events, this is a sustainable event, and this is how it's appealing to a group of people who care for that. Not everybody does, and we can't convince them at that event, but they all care about what they're eating and how much people pay for it. So other ways of that can be done, so we can incentivize choice, i.e. we can give something positive, but we can also kind of make it a little bit less appealing, and therefore disincentivize that, can I pronounce this? But it just basically, again, creating a bit of a friction in our minds. We don't really like it. So reusable cup is a really good example. You have to give £1 deposit. So you're saying there is value to this. So please kind of don't treat it as an item you would normally have treated it and put it in the bin or take it home, just like you have informed us with this. So we're now clear and aware there's value to this, and there's a reason this exists, and it's different to what we're used to, but let's kind of think about it. But also, you've actually now disincentivized them dropping something in the bin. They're going to think twice whether it's going to be something that we will do, which is often the risk that's carried around these items. So actually, there's a bit of a mix here. There's a default choice, because that is how all of the drinks are actually being served. So you don't have to think, which choice am I making, how am I going to do this? That's what's available. But you're managing the risk of the bin, the litter, by disincentivizing, and kind of have this sort of value messaging, which is really important, because we don't value free stuff. I don't know whether you've noticed that kind of in yourselves, but anything that's really, really important you give away for free, nobody really wants it, because it can't really be that good then, right, if it's free. So there is also that messaging around things that's really important. There has to be value to it. Otherwise, people won't really engage with it the way you want. And so just a couple of other sort of examples around this. There's also this default choice of reusable options provides the infrastructure, right? So it makes it easy for people to do so, but it also normalizes the behavior. And we just talked about, normalizing and kind of how people think about the norm is really important. So it's taken away the choice, but it's also made it normal. And it's also made like what everybody else does. And if everybody's doing it, I'm doing it. And if you've been to a number of events who do this, and then you come out to the real world and go, single use, but it's not normal, because your experience has now been shaped by a lot of these different other touch points. And now you start making different choices outside of that. And that's sort of, if you think about corporates, for example, that's kind of my space and domain. Often the consumers are the ones that brands say, when the consumer asks me for it, I will do that. Or when the client asks me, I will do that. But clients and consumers and customers are being educated by someone else. So they may be educated by social media, maybe by events they go to, maybe by their experiences at home, anything else they get sort of, marketed at. But you can also play that role. So they may have been educated by someone else, or you can help educate them, create this normality, so it starts moving across. And those people who attend those events or kind of get those messages, they could be in your supply chain. That kind of goes full circle. We all wear different hats. I could be a consumer, I could be a supplier, I could be a designer, I could be a CEO. You'd never know. But the influences work exactly the same, and that sort of brain imprint works exactly the same across the board as well. So just wrapping up on a few of these examples in terms of restriction and gamification, if you wanted to restrict, do it in a fun way as well, just kind of coming back to the same point, so we've taken the option of putting this on the floor. And you wouldn't really think of putting this on the floor now because I have to choose, right? Like, this is kind of this competitiveness in us. So that's kind of one fun way of doing that as well without thinking about the intrusion. If you have to counteract people getting upset, that's one way of doing this. And the final option, actually that's an example from an event that I went to last year. There were no choices to consider around merchandise, single use, meat at all. Everything was exactly the way that we would put on paper, basically. Maybe part of it that nobody got upset, it was a sustainability event, so it's kind of the thing that you kind of want to see. But equally, everything was such a good quality and organized in such a way that the core experiences, connectivity, refreshments, networking, food, it wasn't compromised. So there was no reason why you'd want to think about anything else, because it was really, really good. So taking choice away is not always a bad thing. It's how do you present it and communicate it to those who have to deal with that choice is actually what's important. So there's kind of framing that you can utilize, but that is the most powerful way of actually achieving your objectives. Yeah, so just thinking of being at the top of that ladder. And so just to summarize, we need to remember that the behaviors are group-based. I will if you will. So if you're demonstrating, or if there's some sort of championship or leadership, and if you act in the way you want people to act, people see that, they might agree to be part of the same deal. It's norms-based. I will if everybody else does it. I don't want to be standing out. We are social animals, so we need to be part of the crowd. So if you've seen everybody else doing the thing you want them to do, making the choices and arriving in public transport, not littering and not taking merchandise, they will do if nobody else picking things up from the pile of goodies. It needs to be infrastructure-based, so it needs to be easy. So you need to provide that option. The friction should not be there, because the friction is always what's going to stop people from making those choices. And it sometimes is value-based, which is important, because you might appeal to people who care, and therefore they will act on their care. But it's worth remembering that most people will not, because most people will have other pressures, and therefore sustainability should never be something we market as a differentiator. It should never be a premium thing, because then the point is you're excluding and you're making it something to aspire to rather than live every single day. And it should not be something that sells your event. Event is not there for sustainability. Sustainability is something like health and safety used to be 10 years ago. You can't really kind of go to a company and go, we've hurt 5 less people, last month. Please come work here. Doesn't really work. So just to finish this, is that to give you a couple of examples of how this fun can work in very easy ways. You don't, again, have to throw anything at people in terms of stats and that's. So that's providing reasoning and visualization. Why should you save water? Well, it's money. And prompting sometimes can also work. So an example kind of on the right, stop water while using me, is a good way, because again, you're still looking at this. So all the messages are going to be in the same place. How do you optimize that? And the final thing, because I'm getting the sign, is just to leave you with the fact that because we're changing behaviors, the motivations and behaviors will vary for the different stakeholders at the event. So when you start to design this, we need to think about whose behaviors are you trying to change and what motivations or nudges will be most effective for them. Where in the ladder do you have the power or influence to put them on? So industry attendees, sponsors, maybe have very different things, but they all are people. And so those behavioral nudges will work regardless. And that's kind of the beauty of it. The logic is the same. The application might look a bit different. Thank you very much. That's the end of that. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Marina. Absolutely fascinating. I've been in this game for about 25 years, and I'm sitting there trying to scribble some notes. So I'm looking forward to the presentation afterwards. But we've got about 10 minutes for some Q&A, some microphones on the floor. So a quick show of hands for some questions, please. Just a couple on the back.
Testing. Thanks. That was really interesting. Thank you very much. I've got a sort of general question, and it doesn't necessarily need an answer now, but if anyone, I'm really interested in finding out if there's any kind of sort of recommended events industry training and courses on the management of sustainability in the delivery and design of events. And I just wondered if you had any experience and recommendation.
Well, first I'll have to plug ourselves. Obviously, we do that, but very sort of limited. Not suggesting you come for the services, but if you want to, feel free. But there are a number of organizations, a number of networks, industries, which either provide the sort of community-based learning or resources, and I can make recommendations, specific ones. Let's start with Trace. If you haven't yet looked into it, look in Trace. There's a lot of content, lots of templates, lots of examples, and a training, and a couple of other communities. And I'm happy to just link you into the communities to then find what's most appropriate. So we probably need to do the tap-in at some point.
Thanks, Marina. My question is, are there any tools out there where you can measure the impact of your sustainability? So it's really handy having these initiatives to say, so like today, you know, we're saying we're going paperless, we're doing this, we're doing that. How can we measure it? So especially if we've got stakeholders or we've got bosses higher up the food chain, excuse the pun, who are sort of saying, why are we doing this? So I'm just sort of thinking, you know, so that we can get leadership on board, are there any tools that we can use to prove that, yes, sustainability and having sustainable events is worthwhile?
I think that's a really good question, because there's kind of two parts to that. One is when you're having to convince leadership, every leader, every organization will have different motivations. So the why and what sort of evidence they need to be convinced will definitely vary. You know, for some, it's going to be commercial considerations. So how do you save money through cutting certain things out? For some, it's going to be, I have an ambition and I have to align to this. So can you tell me how fast you go and how it fits in? For some, it's going to be data, and for others, it may be something completely different. So I think the starting point is figuring out what would actually shift that opinion and what do you need to show before you go into data collection. Because I think sometimes there's a danger of counting lots of numbers and units and beans and things, but that's not actually what moves the organization potentially in terms of the investment into that space. So that's one. But if you did want to start quantifying, I think there's also two options here. One is just decide what you're quantifying in terms of what your organizational targets might be. You know, it may just be as simple as we want to cut out single-use anything. So therefore, your measurement is really easy. We had 3 tons of single-use X, Y, and Z. We now have 0. That's a good metric. You know, it could be waste, it could be any kind of components that's easy to quantify. Start with easy, because a lot of the stuff, circularity is such a massive component and a tool to this that even just, you know, switching to single use, reducing any kind of volume and optimizing the value for as long as possible, those are easy numbers you can just make up on the back of an envelope or a napkin or Excel if you wish, but, you know, they're not kind of really scientific. But then if you wanted to move further, then there are tools like carbon calculators, water calculators, and there's a couple. There's Julie's Bicycle, which is a good one for creative spaces, creative industries. There is Trace Calculate, which is subscription, but that's an option. The data generally tends to be also quite basically public. So if you have a little bit more of an understanding on the carbon side, you know, it's an Excel spreadsheet you could also pull together. It's also worth remembering, and I always try to remind people, carbon is not everything. Carbon is just one planetary boundary, a whole separate conversation potentially on that, but nature, materials, you know, and other things also matter. So carbon in itself might not be a calculation you want to undertake unless you understand what that means. So there's a bit of that sort of element, I think, first. Maybe use a framework like the one I suggested and start thinking what the shifts would be.
Not a question, but to follow on from that. I'm at the Department of Land Economy, and I'm part of the Green Challenge, and that uses a framework to measure what you're doing. And colleges are involved as well in Green Impact, and that's a very easy way to get started. And there's tools inside of that to measure things and quantify it all. So yeah, get into Green Impact. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I'll look that into as well.
Any more questions or comments?
name badges. They're really good.
Can I just say, it actually was an example on one of my slides, which I've skipped, given we have them in real life, because I was going to say how amazing an intervention this is, because firstly, saves paper, we just discussed in this, it gives you extra functionality. So from the business case situation, you're actually saying, I didn't just save paper, but there's analytics here in terms of connections, in terms of the people, roles that are so valuable. So maybe to your point, what's the added value of more sustainable sort of intervention would also be a selling point.
Anything further? It's almost time for refreshments, but last chance, any further questions or maybe observations? I know personally I thought the ladder was a really interesting tool that could be adopted to clearly sustainability, but actually there's probably many parts in life that could be applied as well. So I imagine there's a few parents in the room with children, and trying to influence and motivate children can be quite difficult too. So I think a really useful tool and very, very stimulating for me. Any other last questions before we go to some refreshments? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening.
So we now have a break, so we can grab some teas and coffees and make our way back into the adjacent rooms where the exhibitors are. For those that are from Cambridge, and for those that aren't, quite a few of the Meet Cambridge members are exhibiting today, so I'd really encourage everyone to get around, tap your cards and get to know one another and get to know the local supply chain with regards to sustainable events. Thank you, and we'll be back in here in about half an hour. Thank you. Time-wise, good. Yeah, no, it's good. No, really good. The time and effort planning does make a big difference.
guys are.
No, honestly, I'm fine. No, it's only for a couple of minutes. When everyone's squatting, I'm from Ireland. I'm fine. I'll probably do follow up in the gallery. Yeah. Just had a little category. Yeah, I said that would be right on Kelly Street.
Literally 2 minutes to go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please, that would be great. Hello, thanks very much for those clapping. That's really helpful. Appreciate that. Thank you. Can I just say it's fantastic to see so much conversation and networking going on. It's a really good day for that. So, and it's nice to see people moving around in different seats and so forth. So it's all part of it. Please don't forget to keep tapping your card and extending your network further. So the next speaker up, Anji Miller. I'll run through a brief sort of bio for Anji. We've got another terrific speaker today. Anji is an advocate of equality, diversity and inclusion and is one of the co-founders of Global Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in Technology Transfer, which is an initiative to raise awareness and promote EDI in the technology transfer sector. Anji is a technology transfer professional with more than 19 years of experience working in the academic and not-for-profit sectors. Her current role at LifeArc involves working with academic and charitable establishments to identify and cultivate early-stage healthcare technologies. Anji is a champion for professional advancement in STEM careers, and Anji is also active in many initiatives both in LifeArc and the innovation community. A key priority being to address the current UK skills gap and training shortage. Anji leads LifeArc's provision of STEM outreach, translation training and fellowships with responsibility as the skills lead for the Innovation Hub and gene therapies. Anji contributes towards many committees and is a board member of AUTM, the Alliance of Technology Transfer Practitioners, ASTP, Certified Licensing Professional, and a member of the Bioindustry Association for Cell and Gene Therapy Advisory Committee as well. So a really extensive background and career there with lots of work in STEM. Can I ask everyone to please give Anji a very warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I know I've spoken to a couple of you before. It's quite strange. Even though I do a lot of these talks, it's quite strange when someone is running through your life and the touching on some of the touch points that you care to mention. What I wanted to do during the next half an hour is I like to have interaction. I like questions. So if you have questions, please do stick your hand up whilst I'm talking to you. So that we can deal with it. I know we'll have the opportunity to have a Q&A after, but the thing is, like, please do stop me at any point, because the thing is, I'm going to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's one of those topics, I was speaking to a colleague earlier on, that people feel uncomfortable about, despite the fact that it impacts every single one of us. We are unique. And it is where I think, even though society is changing and we're more open about talking about our differences and our needs, it's still uncomfortable when it comes to, are you inclusive? People are asking the question, are you inclusive? Have you considered everyone? Or the terminology that's used. People are, they're worried that they're going to offend someone. But the reality is that the more you communicate, the more you think, the more you learn about individuals, the easier it will be to ensure that your events or any activity that you do really does relate to everyone. Because the thing is, society is global now. We're traveling much more. We are meeting people from the other side of the world that we would never be able to meet. We're communicating electronically. That's one of the gifts of the pandemic. It means that we're more comfortable having a virtual meeting and really seeing and showing what our lives are like. So, let me go into the talk and tell you a little bit about me and what I do. Thank you. Okay, the introduction mentioned LifeArc and GEDITT. These are two of many things that I dabble in because I do wear many hats and I like to stay active. My day job is that I am a technology transfer professional. So I'm a trained scientist in the advanced therapy space. And I decided that I didn't want to have my own research group, so I help other researchers get their technologies from the bench, really to impact society. As a Black scientist, it meant that, going through and learning my skills, honing my skills, I stood out, I was different. So from day one, it was really recognizing, yes, there are differences. In the STEM sector, as many of you know, in the labs, it's very diverse. You have individuals from all over the globe. It means that you understand cultures, not only from your lived experience, but the thing is also what you see going on around you. As a scientist, the reason why I wanted to study science is because I wanted to impact society. I wanted to really create those cures, those treatments, diagnostics that we use every day to really ensure that we have healthy lives. I did it. I was doing it, and I still do it now, but I do it in a different way. I work with many others, so I have to really be able to relate to them, really communicate on their level. So whether that's a scientist, a lawyer, a business person, or really someone just thinking about what am I going to do in life, because I love really talking about STEM and ensuring that those who are thinking about entering the sector really understand the various roles and possibilities and the impact that they can have. It's a great profession, and it's great when someone really reaches their full potential. So that's a bit about LifeArc. This slide just really summarizes what LifeArc does and why, it's so important for us to ensure that really great research that happens, whether it's Cambridge, Imperial, or wherever it is, really does get all the way through. I wanted to really talk about what I do and where I'm coming from. So you can see what I do in my day job. LifeArc does many things, and I dabble with all of these, particularly the skills and training. It is where it means that I am talking about whether it's ED&I or whether it's talking about innovation, whether it's talking about how you would communicate with others, the difference of really the ways that you can convey your information or your message to others. This slide really just outlines the development pathway. So with LifeArc, it's all translational. So at the stage when we are working with others, we know the patient group. It's very important the patient group, the patient voice is heard. And as we're touching on ED&I, the reason why I put this up is because a lot of the time you have activities taking place and you're not really thinking about who it's going to impact and whether it really does address the needs that they have. At some point, I'll touch back on this, but the thing is, like for LifeArc, what we do is we are not only looking at great science, but we're also ensuring that the patients, whether it's through patient-led, bless you, the patient-led charity or the patient group themselves, really know what we're doing and really can say, no, that's not going to work, because the thing is, it's not going to intervene. Yes, Anita.
Thanks, Anji. I was just sort of saying, I know that you're talking about sort of tech transfer and about LifeArc, and you're talking about patients, and I'm kind of sort of just translating that into events. So where you're thinking about patients, for event organisers, transpose the word patients to your delegates, your attendees, think of them as the end goal. I'm guessing that's kind of where we're coming at it from. Am I right?
Yes. And it's whether you are looking at something they are going to use, or you are bringing them to an event. Because what I was going to go on to, as well as doing all this, we actually bring the patient groups to us. We ensure that they are at the events and they can attend. Many of the disabilities, many of the needs are not apparent when you see a lot of the patient groups or when you meet the individuals. A lot of the time it could be their children. Unfortunately, this is the case. And it is where you will look and you'll think that this child is happy, healthy, but there are a lot of challenges that they face. But we want to hear what they are. Otherwise, when we are looking at science or anything like that, we're not going to really address it. The next hack that basically was touched on in the intro is GEDITT. As well as working within the innovation, the scientific innovation space, it is where I could see that the professionals within there, but also the discussions, it was uncomfortable for people to really address equity, diversity, and inclusion. GEDITT is the initiative that I co-founded with some colleagues, and it's global. So it is where the co-founders are all over the globe with myself, and it really is where it's a movement where we can bring others together, so we can deliver talks like this, or conversations can be had, resources are available. So it is where ED&I is not proprietary. It is where it really should feed through best practice. And what I'll do is, in the following slides, is really touch through how your events can really address who the events are for, but ensuring that the best practice, that whether it's the individuals who are setting up the events or the attendees, they all really ensure that it's an inclusive event. It's for everyone, and no one feels as though they don't belong there or they weren't taken into account. So all the time, you know, you hear people talking about ED&I, whether it's equity, diversity and inclusion and accessibility, equality, diversity, inclusion, and really ability. It's really where there are many acronyms, there are many terminologies, and it really, they all are trying to really, almost categorize key characteristics that really outline who we are and why we're different. Within UK law, there is an act that really does protect and ensure that no one is discriminated based on certain characteristics. This is the Equality Act, and you'll probably hear people talking about it, or they're referring to something, and it's really the key legislation is this legislation. It exists in Europe, and almost every country has something akin to this. In the UK, the 9 characteristics there really cover the main spectrum of us, what makes us different, really what makes us unique. And what we need to do is really ensure that everything we're doing, whether it's an event, whether it's conversation, whatever we're thinking about, we are taking into account these. And when I start using some of the terminology, I'm referring basically to ensure that those activities are taking these characteristics into account, and you're not. And it is where you are acting in a way that you are not marginalizing anyone based on just one of these or overlapping. And I'll go into some of the terminology there. So I mentioned ED&I, EDIA, IDEA. There are various ways and the order that individuals put this in. In the US, it's DEI. It is where that you shouldn't get bogged down with acronyms, really. You just ask clearly, what are you referring to? Forget it. We deal with basically diversity right across the board. It's no one should feel as though they are less worthy or less valued based on any characteristic. But what you'll see are a lot, you know, when you go to have a look into this to try and see that your events are addressing this, you'll see a lot of terminology talking about inclusion, diversity, and equity. You can see the definitions there. Basically, it is where you want to ensure that your events are inclusive. They're multifaceted. They've taken into account everyone. That even if you hadn't thought about it before, with this event, based on who is going to attend, you will address it. Ensuring that your events are inclusive and that you are taking ED&I into account is not a tick box exercise. It's not a one-off. I mentioned before best practice. It should weave through everything that you do. So whether you are looking, you know, the material for the lanyards. I mean, here, this is amazing, this technology. I've never used one of these before. And I have to stop myself, even during the talks, to playing around because it's so great. But the fact that, you know, this is something that's sustainable, the material that goes around someone's neck, it's really just ensuring that even that's thought about. Okay, if you've got, for example, individuals who are sensitive to certain materials, you want to ensure that it's not going to irritate them, even though you've addressed one point. The previous speaker talked about sustainability. It should not be in isolation to ED&I or any other aspect. They should all go hand in hand. And this is one thing that, you know, oh yeah, my event's sustainable, but the thing is I'm not addressing ED&I. It should be where you don't think of any of these in isolation when you're planning and thinking about, okay, who's going to be there? What measures can we take? It's understandable that certain structures are not going to necessarily have the doorways and things like that that you would need to have for wheelchairs. But if you've taken steps to try and address some of those, it will be appreciated by those attending. The inner circle, the inner intersection here, you can see the word belonging. the idea here is that if you take into account these three aspects, the individual or the whatever is the event will ensure that those who are participating will feel as though they belong, because you have taken into account the 9 characteristics that I've mentioned before. Does that make sense? Yeah? Are you with me? I know that ED&I is something that people feel very nervous about. Yeah? Okay. I want to take it one step further with some of the terminology that I'm going to use. And you've probably heard this many times before. Has anyone heard of intersectionality? Or the intersection? I can see some nods, which is really great. I know that a lot of the time when people mention ED&I, some cloud over because they're thinking like, oh, you know, and they think about woke and all these other terminologies to describe individuals who are really just trying to think about like, we all are valuable. But intersectionality is an important aspect to consider, because it's very easy to think, okay, I'm going to be inclusive. I'm going to look at the metrics. And what you do is the easiest thing you go to is gender. It's low-hanging fruit. That's why. It's not going to really offend anyone. You know, you say someone will say like, you know, yeah, it's a balance. It's, you know, we've taken that into account. But the only thing they've looked at is to ensure that maybe they have a female somewhere there, a token female. It really is where it's more complex than that. We are unique, and it's really, although we're moving, the society is moving to a way that we are more aware and respectful of the aspects that make us individuals, make us human. It is where it's easy to say, okay, in everything I do away from work, I'm taking these into account. But to have the conversation and say, no, the event needs to take into this account, this, and we're going to measure, it's uncomfortable, because it is where everyone will be in a position that's not nice. It's really where you cannot measure what, you know, how far you've come and the improvements and the impact without really addressing where you are. And half of the time, when we have a look at the statistics, it's not inclusive, it's not diverse, it's not taken into account the individuals. Considerations haven't been put in place. And that's fine. It's fine to admit that and have that point where you're going to move forward. But the importance is that you have to take strides to change it. Intersectionality is really the overlap. It's covering where, you know, multiple characteristics that are mentioned there have been addressed. It's really impacting a person or a population. So, for example, you're female, you're Asian, you're over 50. It's really where you come from working class background. There are multiple intersections there. And it really is where it doesn't mean that just because you're female, that's the only thing you address. You really have to look at the individual in themselves. Does that make sense? Is that clear? So we've mentioned ED&I. I went through some of the terminology. It's really where there were loads of nods. So some of the expressions and you're aware of the actual legislation. So it's illegal to actually discriminate, even though a lot of the time it's done all over the place. Why is it important? And why is it important to events that you are organizing? Why is it important? For me, a lot of the events I attend, they cross. It could be business, law, it could be science. Why is it important that even some of the technologies that I see, I don't ask the question, what about the countries that can't afford it? Or what about the countries that will need it because there's no cure, there's no health system like the NHS? It's really where we are all valued and we are all important. And that's why it's the right thing to do. It's being human. It's really showing that you are thinking about others and what they mean. It means the teams that you have, you're taking into account every perspective, their importance, but also, being inclusive means that for an event, you are thinking not only of the main group, that will attend, you say, oh yeah, it's probably going to be people from the college. It's not. It's if you are going to have an event and it's going to be truly inclusive, and it's going to cover anyone possibly who are interested, whether it's sustainability, whether it's science or anything like that, they could come in any shape or form, and you have to ensure that you address that in some way. One of the key tools to ensure that you know within that sector, obviously you've got statistics there that say, you know, for example, scientists, the percentage who actually have a disability and will require assistance is X percent. It's very low, by the way, because it's really something that needs to be addressed. It is where you need to think, okay, if we're going to advertise this event or we're going to talk about this event, will everyone see it? Will they be able to access it? Will they be able to read it? Do you really want them there? Do you want them to contribute? Do you want them to have a rounded and fulfilled experience within your event? Really, are you bringing them there really to just say, like, we had this event and we had X number of people? It's really the time that they had there. Could they really accept the message that you are conveying during your event? There are, you know, when I was preparing this slide, I was almost going to overwhelm you with statistics because there are so many touch points that talk about the value of being inclusive, the value of really having inclusive teams, inclusive events. It's common sense, because I was talking to someone earlier and I said, you know, a lot of it is common sense and really thinking about and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And if you don't understand, you ask the questions. Questionnaires, evaluations are your friend. Reference points are your friend as well, because they give you a benchmark to really work towards. It doesn't mean that you meet this quota and then you stop. It really is where, you know, if society has X percentage, really you want to reflect that, or you should be working towards reflecting it. And if it doesn't, you ask the questions, why not? Why aren't there more individuals, you know, for example, if the population has 20% that really require assistance, why aren't you seeing that within the event, the attendees? Why aren't you seeing that, you know, when you go anywhere? There are reasons for that, and it's really where it's not just for one person to fix, it's for everyone to fix. This slide is quite a powerful slide, and I've used it so much, but the thing is, others have used it as well. It really outlines the challenges faced, and this is something that I think, to put it into context for this talk, when you are talking about how you think about your events and what you're doing and for your events, you should really just think back to this when you are looking, okay, what really happens? You know, if you say, like, okay, I'm going to do something, really, you've got the equality scenario. But if you really are going to take steps, the ramps, the doorways, you know, are you going to have, for example, are you going to have closed captions? Are you going to have someone signing? We mentioned before food in the previous talk. Are you going to take into account someone who does not really touch anything that involves, like, animal products? A lot of the time, I must admit, sometimes you know, the previous speaker mentioned that sometimes a vegetarian option is not very attractive. Sometimes it's the best, let me tell you. Sometimes it is. But most of the events that I go to now, to really ensure that they can cater for everyone, because there are intolerances, you know, there are, you know, allergies, but also there are some that really you have to really try and have equity. What they'll do is they will just go totally vegetarian. And it really covers a lot, but also the choice you will have, where you will have something that's gluten-free. They'll mention the ingredients so that you can see that really, if you have a unique intolerance, that you don't have that. It is where they'll say, like, you know, we're not going to have any alcohol. They'll take steps into place. And really, with your events, what you are aiming for is the justice scenario. There are many ways that you can do that, and it will take a long time. Technology is helping. I mean, things like this. There are tools also that really, for example, when I'm talking, it could translate there and then on the spot. It is where most of my meetings by Zoom, Team, or anything like that will have the ability to put on closed captions. I speak to individuals who are across the globe. My accent will probably cause a problem because the thing is they're thinking, what? Even in the US, they struggle to understand what I'm saying. So it's really where to have the closed captions there and for someone to focus and concentrate and understand what you're saying and take the message, even some of the nuances in your expression. It's really where it's easier to have it where they can read it. But also I'm aware that for someone who is blind, how would they cope? And one of the mechanisms is really where, and best practice is that you would describe who you are. You would give them some context so they're not just hearing my voice, they can really put a person there in their minds. And it's thinking, will you have anyone within your events like that? Is it possible to have that? And if there were, how would you accommodate them? I think it's really where there are standards now that basically in 2024, no one should feel as though they're excluded, or no one should feel as though they're not, they're not considered with any event or any activity, whether it's virtual, in person. It's important that, really look at what others are doing, ask the questions. Mentioned before with regards to sustainability, sometimes you'll be thinking, I'd like to have whatever, does it exist? It is where if you ask, someone will create it for you. My last slide is really the take-home slide that I know that Anita was telling me I haven't got long left, so I will go through this. But these are some of the actions that you can take. I've touched on some of these. For your events, if you have certain policies and practices that you want others to recognize, and that's whether it's speakers, whether it's attendees, do have that information available. It is where I think it's also important that when you bring someone to give a talk, the brief that you give them, you put things into context. They may not be the right person, because when they're up there, you can't control what comes out of their mouth. But that could ruin your event completely. It is think about who your attendees are. What are their needs? Have you got ramps? Have you considered, for example, are there any special needs that they're going to need? Will you have someone signing? Is it global? Is it an international event? The material that you have, can they really access it? Will you have anything in Braille? I think it's important that, I wanted to touch on intersectionality and cultural diversity so that you do think about some of these things. For example, alcohol. Will you have alcohol there? Will people feel as though they have to? It's not just a cultural thing. Some individuals do not want to be around alcohol for whatever reason. They shouldn't feel as though to network, they have to have a glass of wine or a beer. It's really thinking, okay, how are you going to get the message across? How are you going to tell people? If you want to have a diverse attendees, not everyone is going to have the latest access to, high-speed internet or access everything electronically. What about, having some way of getting it across, like going into touch groups and telling them, how is the message going to be spread? How are you going to invite these individuals? It's really where I mentioned the patient groups before. That was an example, because the thing is, they're not going to go to the life science sites that basically a lot of things are promoted on. Some people don't even use like Facebook, much less LinkedIn. So it's really ensuring that your audience are reached, the full prospect of your audience are reached. I mentioned about the speakers. Very common, and I use it a lot, are pronouns. The prep for your speakers, do ensure that if you want to have a certain standard, are they happy to comply? And this may be the decision whether you have them. The panel that you have, it should be diverse. I don't mean really male, female. I mean, really, you should have culture, there's value in having other perspectives, but it needs to be balanced. And it's really where it's not just for the sake of like, okay, what looks there. It's really to give a rounded message, to ensure that there's a full experience, it's not one perspective. It's covering all options for the attendees. So it really is a rounded perspective of anything. The last thing that I want to touch on is that don't be afraid of feedback. Every event you should evaluate. You should find out where you can improve. It's not a one final destination. It's a journey. The slide before, when I saw that, it was like, that's perfect, because that's ED&I as well. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Anji. A really fascinating and provocative presentation. So thank you. I think we're all going to go away and think about, what can we do differently. And one sentence particularly resonated with me, and I'll just read it back. It's from the slides, but I thought if there's one that we take away from that presentation, it might be this. And equality, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in all aspects is the right thing to do and requires no further justification. Pretty simple, but it's really, really powerful. So thank you. I hope that really does resonate with the rest of the room and not just myself. We've got some time for some Q&A. We've got some mics on the floor. We've got some questions from the audience, please.
Oh, I stunned everyone into silence. It's like...
Thank you very much for that. My question is about how collecting feedback and trying to work out if that intersectionality of people is there, because obviously some things you can ask and some things you can't. So how do you know, how can you quantify if you are doing the right thing or not? By not offending people, asking the right questions, is that a GDPR grey area?
Yes, it's a brilliant question, because the thing is, I mentioned before, events are global. We do have an issue with GDPR. And you mentioned GDPR to the US or anything, they'll be like, really? Because they don't know what it is. But when you have your events, when you have a look at common practices, when you are registering, you can collect a lot of data. It is where that's the event when who's going to attend the event. But the thing is, there's two things to think about. Who are you promoting the event to? So who do you want to be there? The information that you gather will be to verify that you are reaching those individuals and the experience that they have after. For GDPR, you really have to ensure that you have a way of storing, capturing this information, but also that it's safe. You can't have, collect information for information's sake, and then you don't look after it, you don't anonymize it, so that basically you end up seeing, or individuals receive all sorts of information that they shouldn't do after because they're on a list. For the information that you're collecting, there are strict rules and regulations in how you collect and what you ask. Why would you be asking about someone's sexual orientation for an event that really doesn't touch on that? When you ask for any information for the registration, it is a good way of collecting the data of who is attending, but you need to say why, and they have an option not to provide that. Personal information is personal for a reason. And it's really where, if you're not going to act on it, if you're not going to make a difference, why are you collecting that in the first place? So it's really thinking how you go. It's great that you have the intentions, but don't just do it just for doing its sake. It's really understanding why you're collecting that information. But it is a way that you can really ensure that you are reaching certain populations, and some will be happy to give you that information.
Back row.
Waving, it's
at back.
Is there any good examples of organisations or companies that are running their events almost not quite seamlessly, but kind of sort of the standard is reaching the best practice?
Yeah.
That kind of sort of gives us examples to follow.
There are a lot, and it's really where some are not that well known. It's, for example, resource-wise, because there are movements and even companies that really provide a lot of information and resources to help you along that ED&I journey. As I mentioned before, it's non-proprietary. So you can see all the policies and everything. It's whether they put that into action. And that's one of the issues. So the policies you can access, most people will have, you know, bog standard, everyone will have modern slavery. But the thing is, it really is where, are they talking about what their ethos is? And that's what you should look at. But only lift that and take it and modify it if you are going to live by that. With regards to companies, for example, the Wellcome Trust. And one of the companies that they support is EDIS, and it's EDIS. It is where it's a site that will have a wealth of information, but also they will have some of their events recorded so you can see what an inclusive event is like. So, you know, for example, the presenter not only will be here, you'll have someone signing, they will also talk through and describe what the presenter, how the presenter looks. And that's whether that's virtual, whether it's online or whether it's in person. It is where they will talk through and list through some of the things that you can do. For example, that list that I had, the practical experiences, they will talk through why you do those and why, who it will be impacting. So I'd say that it's because it's packaged up so you can really have a look. That's one of the top resources. But you'll have different establishments. Once you know those, you'll start seeing it. One or two things, because very few events cover all of it.
Hi, Angie, thanks for that. Just picking up on a question that was asked just a moment ago, Visit Britain have put together a DEI toolkit, and there are a couple of representatives here from Visit Britain. So if you connect with them, you'll be able to access that toolkit. Also, other associations that are getting it right that I've seen myself is Autumn, so the association that Anji belongs to, which is I can't remember the name of it, but it's AUTM, but it's about tech transfer.
Basically, yeah, it's a global association that addresses innovation globally. So it's innovation managers, researchers, but the toolkit that Anita mentioned, they produce one, but there are multiple toolkits. There's a toolkit that I'm working on just for Europe because the terminology used elsewhere is slightly different and it can be confusing. But it is where, for example, toolkits, if you just put in toolkits, ED&I, IDA, you will have a whole list of resources and different movements that are taking place. There's almost a toolkit for every sector. So it's really where you can have a look, and these are resources. A toolkit is a collection of resources really that will help you to start your journey. It will give you what you can write down and the actions and the policies that you can put there. But the difficult bit is putting them into practice, because you will, they will turn around and say, you are saying this and doing another thing.
Good. Do we have time for one last very quick question? One? That's a very clear one. Any last quick questions? Anita, that's a none. Okay.
And I said I was going to stick to time. It's like, why did I jinx myself? It's like, thank you so much.
A very warm round of applause. Thanks very much, Angie. Very much appreciated. Really interesting. We're going to move into the panel Q&A in a moment. So I'll call people up one at a time. There's a few speakers that are participating in the panel that have not spoken yet, so I'll give them a quick bio as well. So if I can invite Angie back up as well, and Marina as well to the front, please. Can I also take this chance to introduce Madalena. Madalena will join us, is from Opening Doors and Venues. They're a professional conference organisation or organisers. They've been established for more than 20 years. They specialise in academic and scientific conferences and work closely with Meet Cambridge. And the final person on the panel is Ben Bujry. Ben, please come up to the front. Ben is the head of commercial at Downing College and is actively involved in the development of and delivery of sustainable events with more than 20 years experience in the sector. And Ben also works very closely with the Meet Cambridge team. So a warm welcome to the panel. As part of the registration, round of applause. As part of registration, we've captured a few questions which we can run through, but If you like, I'm happy to start with questions from the floor. If you're a bit shy, I can go back to those questions. So, roaming mics, questions from the floor for the panel, if there are some.
Thanks, Stuart. My question really, Anji, it's going to be aimed at you, Anji. ED&I, I'm going to say it as it is. It's a hornet's nest. Everybody knows we've got to do it. It's important. We know why we need to do it. How do we do it? Because we're all terrified of offending somebody, and that's the fear. Because if people are upset or they're offended, they'll take to social media, and you get hauled over the coals. How do we make sure we don't offend anybody?
Yeah, it is a hornet's nest, and it is where I mentioned before that it's not a tick boxing exercise. It is something that you have to take your time and progress. You will not be completely inclusive in one exercise. I think one of the first things that you do is take stock of where you are along that journey, and what does inclusive mean? It's what do you offer? Is it a service? Or, it's really looking and using the resources that are there, the comparators, the statistics. Are those the correct statistics that you are comparing yourself against? Maybe you're unique, but the thing is, I think the important thing is really asking the question, are you inclusive? Who are you asking? And what would be an inclusive look like for whatever you're offering? Don't be afraid to explain. I mentioned before policies and procedures, don't be afraid to explain that you are making strides to improve things. No one is going to vilify you for that. I think the important thing is that a lot of the time people lift these policies and think like, oh, I like that, or these phrases, and they're not practicing what they're preaching. Social media is, you can't stop people from talking. But I think if you're having the conversation, if you're really trying to walk the walk, they won't attack you, they will help you. I think you'll get more help than anything else.
Very good. Yes, on the left.
Hello. So something that resonated with me was the fact that in order for us who hire events groups and catering groups, in order to enact sustainability in particular, a big suggestion was having more time. And I was wondering, once we've kind of gathered that more time, how do we support our suppliers in providing those sustainable choices so that we can make them? Because quite often, I would have to say that a lot of the Cambridge colleges are very good at it, and it's becoming much more popular and much more prevalent. But sometimes you don't know what to push for from a supplier in order to get the most sustainable outcome, and sometimes they may not have that option. So how do you kind of start and initiate those discussions in perhaps like menu changes, or making sure that areas they're providing is sustainable and things along those kind of lines? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that's a brilliant question, because I always say supply chain or procurement is the superpower, and that's actually superheroes, because that's where you can start making those decisions. I think the first thing would be to start with the end in mind together. So, what's the outcome? What is the environmentally sustainable event going to look like? And I'm going to make it very specific, environmentally sustainable, because you have the social aspect to that. But from an environmental perspective, what is it that you're wanting to achieve? And not just the numbers and metrics, but what are you trying to do? I'll give you an example. We had a client and we said, what does good look like? Well, good looks like when we have learned something, we have made a change from the previous event, and we've started a conversation with our suppliers. So firstly, we found out what they are doing, because half the problem, they never get asked. So they don't really either offer that up, and they get really excited when somebody does ask and go, I can do all of these things for you. Or you've made them think, so that's a good thing. And you've also identified the kind of metrics you want to be improving for the next round. So that could be a good event outcome. And so then you had this discussion with your suppliers and going, so what is good for you, right? So that would be a starting point, I would suggest, because it's going to vary. But in terms of then the specifics, I think back to what are your core principles? So you're going to have a really long wish list of things that you ideally want to get, but without magic wands, you're going to get the first 4. do your suppliers know what those first 4 are? And do you know what would stop them from giving those things to you? And those things could be budgets, right? Very kind of basic level. So, okay, let's just think how we best spend the budget. So if you're only going to have £3, random numbers here, you know, what are you going to give away or sort of not necessarily pay for and ask them to do, but maybe focus the money on the things you're prioritizing in this case. And I think that sort of dance and that sort of conversation is super important, because I think often, even if you do have this magical time, it starts off with, I need you to do this and give me lots of data. That's not really an opportunity for a supplier to say, but I could like do these things for you that you haven't really thought about. So I think that would be my kind of 2 things. Start with the end in mind first and figure out what is that for you, and then have that conversation, give them an opportunity to tell them why it might not happen. So together, you can then figure out what you might have to give up. You will have to have trade-offs. We need to be clear on both sides, because then nobody feels like they've been exploited or pushed or, you know, in any way cornered to deliver something that ultimately not going to help you.
If I can just build on
Can I
that,
just
Ben.
add to that, actually?
Yeah,
I think sustainability means different things to different people, actually. So I think it's about engaging with the venue and finding out, as you say, what your aims are as an event organizer, but then talking to the venue about what they can do and having that open dialogue. I think what a venue can do is provide an outline of all the initiatives that are happening at the moment and just see if that matches. And that would hopefully look like some sort of sustainability strategy and a list of initiatives. We recently launched our new website a couple of weeks ago, www.downing-conferences.cambridge.uk. I invite you to look at it, and on there you'll find a sustainability page, and that outlines all of the things that we're doing from an event perspective, but also as a venue and an estate perspective. So, for instance, a lot of it's going to be down to the move to using more renewable energies, and that's going to be on the solar panels and rainwater harvesting and things like that, and the move towards the gasification of the site. But then there's more specific things about running events. So from a food and beverage perspective, you know, what sort of vegan, vegetarian menus are available, the quality of them, the number of them, are they sustainable, are they sourced locally? We work with an organisation called Cafoodle and also My Admissions, which tracks the carbon footprint and the where these dishes are actually coming from in terms of how we produce them. And also tracks nutrition value as well, which can be really, really useful for delegates. Moreover, it's the introduction of things like water stations that people can use so that people can bring their bottles rather than using mineral water and all that sort of thing as well. So I think there's a lot of things that could be done there. In addition, it's using things like some of the AV and hybrid options that venues are capable of now, which can cut down on travel for delegates and also for speakers as well. Particularly if a keynote speaker only intends to speak for an hour and a half, flying them in, I mean, flying is never going to be sustainable, certainly for the next 20 or 30 years. So I think there's some big things that venues can do there. And also from a travel perspective is you know, we're quite fortunate here in Cambridge that everything is pretty close to each other. The train links are pretty good. One reason for not driving in is the traffic, which can be very, very bad. So that's a sort of an attempt at a sustainable ask there. But we provide a lot of, I think we've got 8 electric vehicle charging points as well, which all help too. And I think the other thing which I think is really important is some of the gardens and the grounds we have here, which is a sort of an overlooked part of venues, and we have a lot of that here in Cambridge colleges, and I'll speak for Downing as well. And I think there's a lot of biodiversity and conservation things that are going on there, which a lot of the gardens are doing, which helps with well-being and gives delegates an opportunity, particularly on residential courses, to really take some time out from the event. So I think it's about having that open dialogue with the venue and finding out what they do. But a good starting point on that is their sustainability outline.
Very good, thank you. Madalena, if I may come to you with a question that's come through. Based on your experience, what have been the main stumbling blocks in stakeholder engagement when it comes to deciding on and supporting sustainability strategies?
I think someone mentioned budgets. And I think, especially from where I'm coming from, where we work with associations and voluntary committees that come together to deliver this one event in their destination. They haven't got previous experience. They've just got the budget in front of them. It all comes down to the bottom line. And then what can they charge to the delegates? So that's an important one to think about. And it is an opportunity for creativity. It's also an opportunity as a conference organizer, if you do have an influence on how that committee comes together and making sure it's a representative of the population you want to bring to that event. People who have got different experience, they're not all from the same line of work and from the same type of life. That helps. There's also availability of things and deadlines and lead times that comes into place, because you might find yourself as an organizer that you've planned everything, there's a timeline, and then your committee comes a month before the event that they want something, they want their sustainable signage now, and they want freestanding screens, and there's 20 of them, but there's no availability anymore because supply is very low. And for that, we're talking about transport, when they decide they do want to bus people over from one place to the other. Not necessarily a sustainable thing altogether, but if it just comes down to it, you find that you have to go to a supplier that's miles away because you've left it too late. I think maybe those two are the biggest, and making sure you've got a committee that it's difficult to do, that is receptive to suggestions and being led, rather than having very, very strong views about things. Where I know it's difficult. Someone was smiling at me there. It's a tough one to navigate around, but it comes back to having open conversations as well with your clients and your committees.
Very good. Thank you. Is there more from the floor? I've got a couple more, so I'll carry on if that's okay. The next one. And this is an interesting from an event planning point of view, so I might lean towards you, Marina, but maybe Anji as well. How can you measure whether an event is environmentally and socially sustainable?
Probably do the environmentally side, and we'll leave Anji to talk about the second bit. Although, as Anji also mentioned, there has to be an intersection and there has to be that combination, because we can't prioritize one over the other, and there will sometimes be trade-offs. And actually, I think digital is a really good example. We shift everything onto digital, but what if you don't really like screens, or your eyes can't take it, or you need tactile experience, you need to make notes, there are sort of all of those things that will need to definitely be taken into account. Digital is also not always the final answer, just gonna have to put it out there. But how do you measure? I think this is then the bit we touched on previously. I think first we need to understand what are we measuring, because let's kind of get the basics. There is no sustainable event. Right? So it's not sustainable, because sustainable by definition is something can go in perpetuity. So unless it's completely net zero, on all sorts of fronts, not just carbon, it's not sustainable. So we have to just accept that and never use the word in promotion. But the next step after that is to figure out which aspects of sustainability are we then trying to improve, and are we then trying to address, and be prioritizing, and for what reason? And I think that's also an interesting one, because very often single-use plastic is vilified, which it should be. Single-use plastic, plastic has a use in lots of different iterations, but single-use plastic is not an answer to everything. And so then we kind of blend it together. We go low-carbon single-use plastic. Big secret, plastic is the lowest carbon. So if you're going to take that out and put other things in, things start shooting off, right? So first we need to understand what are we trying to measure and improve on, for what reason and on what basis. And therefore, we can then start figuring out what data we need. So how do we measure? Well, firstly, we can measure just sort of qualitatively. Did we even consider sustainability? That's a measure, by the way. And did we then sort of, have initiatives, and did we have any changes, improvements, etc.? That's a really important measure, because very often that in itself is already in pushing a shift. I've asked a number of people who were at the different college presentations, have you had questions from any of the customers or visitors or guests on sustainability initiatives? It's really interesting. Only one person said they have had, but the action is still being taken, which is amazing, but wouldn't necessarily be the case across the board. So even measuring, how many conversations have you had with suppliers? Has anybody asked you? Have you told anyone? If you have told, what was their reaction? There was one event we worked with, and they've actually asked a sort of feedback form to what extent sustainability credentials came through at the experience, were they noticeable, and how did that affect their opinion of the person of the event, but also influence their action afterwards. And that in itself is also a measure, because you're there to influence things, right? So I think there's obviously the sort of quantified aspects of it. There's going to be waste, there's going to be carbon, there's going to be sort of, how much waste you normally would have and how much less of that. There'll be money. How much have you contributed to maybe local causes? How many tons of food did you have go to waste, and how many tons of food did you donate to somebody? That's also a benefit. So without getting sort of too deep into the templates, I would say actually hold off and fight the desire to get into the templates first. Do the thinking, what is it and why do I want to measure? And just do it really simply, because carbon sounds like a really scary thing, but ultimately it's just multiplication of something by something. Do you even have the data for that? Would you even be able to quantify it? Just get really simple, the kind of things you can touch, the kind of things you can talk about, the kind of things you can understand. Waste and a massive big bag of stuff, people can see that. Food, it costs you money. How people came to the event and how they normally come, as opposed to you've now prompted them, and how do they now come, that's a thing. Can you just get even a baseline? Some of those things, I would always suggest just don't get into metrics until you understand why you're trying to do them. And once you've understood, you'll find it super easy, because you measure things on a daily basis for yourself. If you're running or if you're not running, if you have positive, affirmations, or you've had some positive feedback, all those things are really, really amazing. Because if you had events and you never had conversation about sustainability, and now you're 5 people came up to me and mentioned the various things, so I'm doing something right. So carbon doesn't matter in that situation, because actually that means there is an action. Social.
From a social point of view, so I was just taking everything that you said in. From a social point of view, it is where you want to ask the questions. And you want to, if you're measuring, ideally, what are you doing now and what are you going to change? And what's the impact of that? You want to ensure that everyone is comfortable with wherever they are, and they can really get whatever message or whatever experience you're trying to put in place. So a simple metric is, what were you doing before you even considered this? And really measuring, okay, how many attendees, who were the attendees? Did you even know really the demographic of the attendees? And then it's really asking them, as I mentioned, feedback and questionnaires are your friend. You can easily get that. You can easily just get them to do an evaluation. You can even ask them within the event. But it's really where you need to act on it. It's really, you can't just ask these questions and not do anything. If you were taking a stance and you were doing something from the outset, explain why you're doing that. And really bring the attendees with you. There's a learning exercise. Everyone is on a journey. You're not going to have everyone who's absolutely perfect, whether it's sustainability or whether it's from a social perspective. There's no judging, but there will be judging if you don't do anything, and that's the problem. Because there will be groups that will ask you, okay, can you give me these metrics? Or can you tell me how you're addressing whatever? Whether it's sustainability, whether it's ensuring that your event is inclusive. So be prepared for that. But it's if you are taking steps to move that way, then it's fine. You're on that journey. You're not going to be perfect. No one is.
Second row. Last one.
Hi. My question is really just where the onus lies in terms of the sustainability. It sort of feels a little chicken and egg. Downing College seems to be taking quite a proactive lead in dealing with clients, but I find when I'm dealing with venues, quite often it's not really raised as well. Perhaps you could do something differently. So it sort of feels a little bit like, does the client need to drive it, or could the venues be driving a little more? So I don't know whether that's a question or whether I don't know how Downing take that as an approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing is it's an evolving, sustainability evolves all the time. I don't think it's a case of doing a bunch of different things and then putting it on a shelf and forgetting about it. So I think many of the things that we're doing have been out of dialogue with event planners, and we sort of add different bits in along the way. So, I mean, I think in terms of onus, I guess it's a partnership really, and I think it's about, I think if we have this conversation in 3, 5, 10 years time, many of the things that we're talking about now will just be commonplace, and I think it's just getting on. It's just been part of that whole process and moving the whole thing along. But I think it's probably got to be a partnership, and finding venues that you want to work with, who match the objectives of your own organisation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Really helpful. Madalena, I was going to ask you very, very quickly, are there any easy wins if you are looking to find a venue or you're looking to plan an event? Yeah, are there 2 or 3 quick, really easy wins you'd encourage people to explore?
Just in the scope of sustainability, rather than, I think the easier ones are the ecological ones, and I know everybody just goes to that. So it's thinking about your less print, thinking about how you can replace that so it's accessible for everyone. Thinking about reusable things, thinking about what's left at the end of this event that I could turn into something that I could use again. Reusable signage, because that will keep your budget low. You don't have to invest in digital signage, for example, if you're an organizer. If you're a venue, you might want to invest in that digital signage because that will be a plus for when an organizer comes to look at you and you can offer this facility. So those are the easiest one to start with. I know the other ones are potentially more important, but they take more time and they take more resources.
And I probably would actually agree, maybe not more important, I think, is the things you actually start because they snowball. And I just want to share one example. It might not be directly an event, but as an example how creativity can kick in. There was a store in the UK, I don't remember the city at that point in time, but it's a clothes store, fashion store. So on the window, the display, what they started to do one year is to not actually change any of the setting. They had a local artist come and draw on the window with chalk, so it's wipeable. And that did everything you needed to do. So you don't have the materials, you have the core message, you have the local support, you have the sort of particular uniqueness about it. It's very attractive. People like handwritten stuff. So just innovative things, and I stop here.
Brilliant. Thank you. All right. Can I just thank the panel for their time and thank you for your engagement. Thank you. All move back to your seats, and I'll introduce Judith to give us a bit of a run through a new positive impact initiative, which is Meet Up and Make a Difference. Judith.
Thank you. Sorry, 2 seconds, everybody. So our objectives for today were very simple. To help the Cambridge events community to learn from one another, to share expert opinions, which we've just done, and for this particular event, to make a difference in some small way beyond today. And with that in mind, I'm delighted to launch a new positive impact campaign that I hope you will all be able to support too. We, Meet Cambridge, the Cambridge events community, we all believe that business events really do change the world that we live in, through the knowledge sharing, through collaborations made, and in many ways that can be difficult to measure. But wouldn't it be amazing if every business event held here in Cambridge gave something back to the city and its communities? If every event had a positive impact on those local communities, wouldn't that be an amazing thing to achieve? So we're calling on your help to meet up, but also to make a difference. And best of all, it's really easy. We've teamed up with 2 of Cambridge's most worthy charities, Cambridge City Food Bank and the Cambridge Sustainable Food CIC. We want to help them get food to where it's really needed, right here in Cambridge. And to do that, we're asking you to take an action at your next event. We know every event is very different, so we've got a few options, and hopefully one of these will fit your next event. As we've done today, could you host a food bank collection? You saw how easy it was, and just one tin from every person could make a huge difference. You may have also noticed, or maybe you didn't, we didn't offer pastries this morning. From our research, they're a large source of food waste, Who needs a second breakfast? Most of us have eaten in the hotel or at home. And I know that they can be tempting, but do we really need them? So at your next event, could you pass on the pastries and maybe donate what they would have cost to one of our campaigns, one of our charities? Could you add a hypothetical fourth course to your dining menus to encourage delegates to make a donation while they're in the city? Or, if you find it easier, just make a financial donation or ask at registration if everyone wants to pay another £1 to the campaign. I've got a short video here that will explain it a little bit more than I have just done now. But after the event today, if you've got any questions on that, please just come back to me and we can have a chat about it. So I'm just going to play the video and I'm going to keep things crossed. It's going to play. Sorry, just skip through. Doesn't seem to be any sound. There is sound. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Steve Clay from Cambridge City Food Bank. Here we are in our warehouse, and you'll see it's absolutely rammed full of food bank parcels at the moment. Unfortunately, after Christmas, it's a time when the need is really very much still there in demand, but our supplies of donated goods through the supermarkets really does drop off. So all the support from organisations like Meet Cambridge is so very, very much important to us in order to enable us to maintain the supply of food to people who still at this time of year are desperately in need of our help and support.
Hello, my name is Sam and I'm the CEO here at Cambridge Sustainable Food. Cambridge Sustainable Food works with the Cambridge Food Poverty Alliance, which is over 30 organisations who've come together across the city to address access to healthy and sustainable food. Current systems of interconnecting power structures drive ill health, poor access to food, climate change and social injustice. Our food system is deeply unjust and will continue to hit marginalised groups hardest. Food poverty is poverty, and we need to shift the narrative to one of food justice, the right to food, and money in your pocket to be able to afford the essentials. But
Our Meet Up and Make a Difference campaign. I'm proud to say that we've got over 50 of our venues supporting this. So if you are speaking to the venues, please mention this. They've been briefed to mention it to you when you're speaking to them. And we've got a comprehensive suite of resources to help you use those campaign messages in your marketing of your events. And I'm really delighted to say that we have a representative here today from Cambridge Sustainable Food. Diana's going to give us a few words now. Anne is going to give us a few words now. There's the microphone just there. Thank you, Anne.
Hi, well, thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you. Sam should have been here, but she's not very well today, so I've stepped in at the last minute. Cambridge Sustainable Food it's an umbrella organisation, and as Sam explained, we do a lot of work in partnership. So there's the Food Poverty Alliance, which includes the Food Bank, Jimmy's, Winter Comfort, a lot of organisations working with people in need. And by having that organisation, it means that needs can be addressed much better if people know what's going on throughout the city. And that sort of networking is vital. We started that before the pandemic, and when the pandemic hit, Cambridge City Council asked us to set up a distribution centre because we realised that there was going to be an enormous need. That was set up. We had 7 or 8 hubs in small community venues around the city, mostly based in areas where people were in need. And I think we have to remember that Cambridge is one of the most unequal cities in the country. We have incredible richness and also incredible deprivation. That went very well. It was a big flowering of an initiative. We had a distribution centre. We had volunteer drivers who collect from supermarkets. Fresh fruit was distributed, fresh vegetables, as well as tinned food. We thought when the pandemic ended, we could scale that down. It's grown. The need in Cambridge, as the food bank statistics show, is greater than ever. There are more and more people who are struggling just to make ends meet. So we have a variety of approaches. Part of that is distributing food where it's needed. So collecting from supermarkets, collecting from other places, and then distributing it to the miniature hubs. But we also work on trying to empower communities. It's not just a question of giving handouts, and I think this is where the food justice comes in. People should be able to afford decent food for their families. And trying to empower communities to enable supply routes, multiple buying, for example, getting communities together is just as much an important part of work as actually distributing. So we do a lot of work, a lot of projects with different communities in Cambridge, often on our own or in partnership with other organisations, to try and create systems where people don't have to become food poor. So it's a big ask. It's a lot of work. We know it's a big task, but we're determined that we are going to make an impact in that respect. We also do work on sustainability and climate change and food diets and a whole host of projects across the spectrum of food. I think on your view of sustainability, I saw a quote. It was in a cafe, and I don't know who said it, but if we're talking about sustainability, eating is an agricultural act. So whatever you eat depends on the land, the farmers, the growers, and the climate. And this sustainability is a broad issue to address, but we're asking specifically for some support with our food justice work. Oh, it's the other thing we do. We run holiday lunches for children in the school holidays with family activities and events, and sometimes cookery classes too. So that's briefly a little bit about us. I hope that's helpful. Okay.
Thank you so much. So as we draw to a close here in the auditorium, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the Masters and Fellows of Jesus College and its Jesus College fantastic conference and events team for their unending support with this event. We really couldn't have done it without them, and I don't think there's any of them in this room, but we did record that. So massive thank you to Anji and Marina for travelling here to Cambridge and giving up their time generously to share their thoughts and experiences with us all. Thank you too to Madalena and Ben for joining the panel and giving us your valuable insights. And of course, a big thank you to Stuart for leading today's proceedings. We are really, really grateful to you all. Thank you to every one of our exhibitors who's turned up today to manage a stand. And thank you to Blendology for all of the support. And lastly, thank you to my small but mighty Meet Cambridge team. You really are the best. We really want you to share your ideas with us so that we in turn can share them wider in Cambridge. We can measure the impact that today has had by getting your thoughts back to us and then sharing them wider. We will be asking a small favour if you could complete a very short survey which will be landing in your inbox very soon. The idea is then that periodically over the next year we'll ask you similar questions so we can see how you've developed and how you've changed your events as a result of today. The Cambridge event community really is a truly special one. And I know that if anyone can, we can all together work to create the change that we all want to see, to make our future events more sustainable, more diverse, more accessible and more purposeful, and ultimately more impactful. Thank you everyone. You'll be glad to know that it's night time to have some food and to have a chat. Thank you very much for coming everyone.